toast. To refusing to be born, chiefly because we are not born. To being very young always and very irresponsible. And feeling like our lives are our own to lead, and being happy and dying in our own ways to please ourselves. Cheers. What? You're worried about that little tumble? Oh, don't be. We're throwing a party tonight. We always throw the greatest parties. You must have heard of them. The dancing, the jazz, people swimming in fountains. And just when you think you couldn't possibly come back another night, a whole new crowd of people comes in and brings it all back to life. I'll invite you to the next one. You'd love it. The party tonight is to celebrate the release of Scott's newest book. My husband, F. Scott Fitzgerald, the great writer. I'm so sorry, y'all. I can't even say it with a straight face. If only you knew. Gatsby, this side of paradise, half of his writing a fraud. But whenever Scott walks into the room, he's the center of it all. He makes his mark on everything and everyone. Our own daughter is even named Scotty after him. It's always, Scott, Scott, how did you do it? Scott, how did you write it? Scott, you're the voice of a generation. If only they could see how often the voice of a generation turns to me when he's hit with a bout of writer's block or gets too drunk to hold a pen. Yes, he does. Yes, he does, baby. But all of that is about to change. Scott promised that this book he'd give me credit. I hadn't read his newest novel yet, but before the party, I figured I should flip through it. It doesn't surprise me to find my own words on these pages staring back at me, passed off as Scott's own. At this point in our marriage, I expect this. You know, he did this with his first book, too. This Side of Paradise. He took words and letters that I wrote to him when we were engaged and put them straight into his characters' mouths. And what did people do when they read it? They mocked the women who were based on me, called them shallow and self-centered. He even tried to publish one of my diaries once. They were going to call it Diary of a Popular Girl, but turns out no one really wants to hear about a popular girl's problems. They think if you're pretty and sweet enough on the outside, nothing could be going on the inside. Back then, I thought it was sweet and romantic that Scott wanted to use my words, but now I see how naive I was, and I want something more. I mean, I am so outrageously clever, I could have been a whole world on my own if I hadn't liked living in Scott so much. But Scott, he doesn't see that. He brushes off my interest in ballet and painting and writing as socialite pastimes and not real art. You know, it's because of me all the women these days are shortening their hair and their skirts. And for a while, it felt like enough to be the symbol of this new kind of modern woman, the flapper. See, flappers saw the way the world worked, and they saw a game to be won. No more standing around on the edges of a dance floor waiting for some average boy to come and pick you out of the lineup and give you an average life. No, we were going out and flirting because it was fun to flirt, wearing bathing suits because we had nice figures, and painting our faces with makeup precisely because we knew we didn't need it. The mothers generally disapproved of their sons taking flappers to dances, swimming, teas, and most of all to heart. That's because when a flapper goes to a party, she bobs her hair, puts on her choicest pair of earrings. I remember my first pair of earrings. My mother gave them to me and they pinched my ears and they hurt and I cried. She yelled at me. She said I shouldn't cry or make a fuss. Be sweet, Zelda, she said. That's the best thing a girl can be in this world. My mother thought women should strive for this ultimate femininity. She called it pink helplessness. Anyways, what was I saying? Oh, right. When a flower goes to a party, she bobs her hair, puts on her choicest pair of earrings, and a great deal of audacity and rouge, and goes into battle. And I was going to battle Scott. For my words, my legacy, my chance to be remembered by the great writers as something other than just a pretty face. But what did I see when I got to the top of the landing but Scott, wrapped up in conversation with Ernest Hemingway and Isadora Duncan? Scott talks to Hemingway so much, sometimes I think those two should have gotten married instead of Scott and me. Scott and Hemingway spent all day locked in a room together debating who's got the biggest novel. I tried to get his attention, but I just couldn't. He was too wrapped up in his own little world of great art and even greater men. And it was then that I realized some men love me because I'm pretty, but those men are always afraid of my mental wickedness. Some men love me because I'm clever, but those men are always afraid of my prettiness. They don't know what to do with me. I was only good for being the woman on Scott's arm, or dressing up in the latest trends. Like a shiny object. Meant to be admired, but void of any real value. And that's the thing about being a shiny object. You spend all your time reflecting other people's light, and the more you break into a million pieces, the shinier you become. And as I stood there, contemplating how I'd become the muse, I was supposed to be the great adventure of my life. Before I even knew what I was doing, I'd fallen. Or maybe I jumped. Scott just laughed the whole thing off and went back to his guests. Oh, don't think I don't know about what he's been saying about me recently. That I'm difficult, peculiar, batty even, that if I were an intellectual or a great artist like him, that would explain some of my quirks, but since he's taken my art away from me, he gets to write me off as just another mad woman obsessed with the great F. Scott Fitzgerald. But at the party, before all that nonsense with the staircase, the literary editor of the New York Tribune approached me and asked me to write a review of Scott's newest book. So I finally get to say my piece. Now, what to write? It'll have to be something shocking. I want everyone talking about this review tomorrow. I got it. Dear reader, I hope this review finds you well. Zelda, of course this review is not finding them well. There was a goddamn pandemic. Oh. Try again. Get straight to the point this time. People of New York City, don't you just wish F. Scott Fitzgerald would go straight to hell and never come back? No. That won't do. Mama would kill me if she knew I said hell in the papers. Be sweet, Zelda. Let's try one more time. Start with the positives, kill him with kindness. To begin with, everyone must buy this book. For the following aesthetic reasons. First, because I know where there is the cutest little gold dress in the store on 42nd Street. And if even more people buy it, I know where there is a platinum ring to go with it. And if even more people buy it, my husband has been saying that he needs a new winter overcoat. The one he's had for the past 3 years has done him just fine, but I do wish he'd stop complaining about it. But that's all besides the point. Everyone must buy this book, because on several pages, I swear I saw a portion of an old diary of mine, which mysteriously disappeared shortly after my marriage. And on several others, scraps of letters which, though considerably edited, do seem to me to be vaguely familiar. In fact, Mr. Fitzgerald, I do believe that is how he spells his name. Seems to believe that plagiarism begins in the home. Bless his heart. Zelda. There. That should make a splash in the papers. Scott may ignore me at home, but he will never ignore what the public thinks of him. I'm sorry y'all had to see me get so intellectual about that. I'm sure you would have preferred something nice and feminine and affectionate. At this time, I suppose I must address some of the rumors y'all might have heard about me. I may have, on certain occasions, acted in a manner that is not as charming as the Zelda you've met tonight. But now that we've gotten to know each other, I'm sure we can all agree that you would have done the exact same as I did had you been standing in my very fashionable shoes. Like you. If this young man next to you started cheating on you with a gorgeous Hollywood starlet, wouldn't you just be a little tempted to take that girl's clothes, throw them in a bathtub, and set them on fire? And you, if your husband wrote a play so terrible you were forced to flee the country, wouldn't you be just a tiny bit tempted to have the teensiest little affair with the most handsome French pilot you've ever seen? And after you published a scathing review of his newest novel, your husband decided to tell you all great women use their talents constructively in their lives. Your only talent seems to be destroying mine. Wouldn't you be determined to show him that you had talent of your own? So, I decided to return to my childhood talent. I was going to become a prima ballerina. I studied with all the great ballerinas in Naples and Paris, and when I stepped up to the bar, suddenly everything made sense. All the chaos of my life since I married Scott melted away. I didn't have to worry about outdoing my old antics to stay in the papers. I didn't have to worry about impressing Scott. I would be great. No. Perfect. And I would do it for me. Now, some might say that practicing for 8 hours a day for 3 years straight is too hard on the body and the mind. And maybe sometimes I did come home too tired to speak, but if you found something that helped you make sense of your place in the world, wouldn't you want to do it as much as possible? And if after all that, all the trying, all the dazzling, all the crowds, all of the striving for perfection, all the madness of turning and turning and turning, you still felt this great and terrible emptiness inside of you. Like things were barren and sterile and hopeless, and in all those crowds you had been completely and terribly alone, and at the bar you had been completely and terribly alone, and when you looked into the eyes of your husband and your child, you were still completely and terribly alone. Wouldn't this little voice inside of you just start screaming at you to make it stop any way you could? Wouldn't you wish for that pink helplessness your mother talked about? Wouldn't it sound just so easy and so sweet? Wouldn't you leap for it the first chance you got? Even if it meant grabbing the steering wheel and driving your car off the road into the sunset. Even if your husband and your child were in the car with you, even if you knew that they would never forgive you, if you had felt just a fraction of the despair that I felt staring down a lifetime of that lonely darkness, you would have acted just like me. Except you wouldn't have. I knew in that moment there was something terrible inside of me, an emptiness that not everybody knew. It was then that Scott began sending me away. He said I was going crazy and calling it genius. I've lived in hospitals like this ever since. The doctors say I'm quite mad. But could a mad person write this? Scott always wanted to write a book based on our marriage. I guess he didn't realize that by sending me here, he gave me unlimited time to tell our story all on my own. It's not exactly like me and Scott. It's fiction, of course, about a girl named Alabama. Oh, I'm from there. The daughter of a Southern judge, just like me, who marries an up-and-coming painter. See? Different. I showed the novel to my doctor, who said it was charming and vivacious. And I sent a letter to Scott, and I told him I'd finally finished something. I sent a copy to Scott's editor as well. Scott's editor said my novel had a slightly deranged quality to it. Well, duh. And said that the author seemed to have difficulty separating fiction from reality. They've obviously never met a literary genius like me before. It's called inspiration. Scott was furious that he hadn't been the first to read it. And get this, he accused me of plagiarizing him. But Save Me the Waltz was published anyhow under the condition that the profits would be used to pay off Scott's debts to his editors. But turns out the general public doesn't appreciate my literary genius either. My novel received overwhelmingly negative reviews. I guess people only like my writing when Scott's name is on it. Speaking of Scott, try not to judge him too harshly. He and I think we ruined ourselves. I've never honestly thought that we ruined each other. Also, I heard one of the nurses saying that when he died, he had been trying to make it as a screenwriter in Hollywood. How cliche. Thank you for indulging my little trip down memory lane here. When I started hearing that sound earlier tonight, it occurred to me that there may be very little left of me for people to remember me by. I've always longed for notoriety. It felt a lot like love, but now I think in 100 years, I should like having young people wonder whether my eyes are brown or blue. Of course, in reality, they're neither. I'll die here, tonight. The doors have been locked and I've been given a sedative, so I'll sleep. No chance of one final fantastic escape. That fire we've been hearing was set by a disgruntled former employee of the hospital. I guess we all have our ways of coping. My sister Marjorie will burn the remainder of my paintings and belongings. When they find me in the morning, the only thing left to identify Zelda Fitzgerald will be her slipper. The last time I wrote to Scotty, she had just had a daughter of her own. I told her how much I longed to meet her, but now I know I won't be able to. Somewhere out there, Scotty is looking down at her baby girl, trying to tell her the best way to survive as a woman in this world. I once thought I knew the answer. It was the first thing I ever said to Scotty when she was born. And they're the words that Scott took from me that haunt me the most. And they're right here in this book. From The Great Gatsby by F. Scott Fitzgerald. Well, I've had a very bad time, Nick, and I'm pretty cynical about everything. Evidently, she had reason to be. I waited, but she didn't say any more, and after a moment I returned rather feebly to the subject of her daughter. Oh yes, she looked at me, absently. Listen, Nick, let me tell you what I said when she was born. Would you like to hear? Very much. It'll show you how I've gotten to feel about things. Well, she was less than an hour old, and Tom was God knows where, and I woke up out of the ether with this utterly abandoned feeling. And I asked the nurse right away if it was a boy or a girl. She told me it was a girl, and so I turned my head away and I wept. All right, I said. I'm glad it's a girl. And I hope she'll be a fool. That is the best thing a girl can be in this world, is a beautiful little fool.